Okay, so I'm back. I thought what I'd do is make a quick video on game characters, and while I've got a game character here, let's actually have a look at how a game character is set up and some of the fun things that exploring Ciri that I actually found with her. Now, yeah, Witcher 3 is getting a bit long in the tooth. I think it's around 10 years old now, but a lot of the information that's in this character is applicable to modern day characters. And modern day game development in general, we're still all about optimization. We're still all about saving as much data as possible so that we can pump out as much as possible. Just because you can do a thing doesn't mean you shouldn't do a thing. You should do a thing. Like dump a million polygons just on one model. Yes, we technically can, but we shouldn't. So this is Ciri, directly from the game. Now, one thing I want to talk about right away is triangulation or optimization. We build all our characters in quads. Sometimes a little bit of triangulation in some areas to help some forms, but then when that gets put into a game engine, that gets automatically triangulated, and it's all like back-end rendering stuff. Triangles are technically the best thing to render, but they're not good to pardon me, they're not good to build with. So that's why we don't build in triangles. Plus, building in triangles is just incredibly hard. But they're great to render. That's what game engines want to render. Okay, so that's why if you ever rip a character from a game engine, you'll see it's triangulated. But once you know topology, you can kind of see past the diagonals and all the different lines. Because generally, all our lines are either going to be going down or horizontal. They'll be going down an arm or they'll be going around an arm. You wouldn't necessarily have edges going diagonally around an arm. So torso here, you'd be having them going down the chest and across the chest, not necessarily diagonally. So with that in mind, you can, if you look through the matrix, you can kind of see what's going on here. So triangulation, that's what happens when you download it, when you rip a character from a game engine. Okay, so this is standard. If you've played Witcher 3, obviously this is like Ciri's standard costume. First of all, let's have a look at just all the little different bits of this character, because it all breaks down into many different bits. And this goes into a little bit of the clothing stuff we're going to be doing. So if I just grab this top section here, you can see that I've got it grabbed, and it's not everything. It's not grabbing, even though this is part of this sleeve. It's not actually grabbing it. That's because it's a completely separate mesh, and as you can see there, you can see what's going on with the skin. It's very cool. All the little bits, this strap here implies something. This little tie here implies obviously ties. The buckle here is two different bits. So obviously you've got the metal buckle itself and then the actual bracer itself. So all these different things are all separate objects. So you can see how the whole thing breaks down very nicely. And it gets really fun when you come into the realm of like props and stuff. So turf wireframe, there you go. So things like this metal belty thing going on, this belt, the dagger, the pouch, the medallion, they're all separate objects, but they're not being built into the main mesh. That's a fun thing I'm going to look at in a little bit as well. They're still separate, and in fact these are all separate with these little things in between to imply that they're being held on by something. Now, if I look at these carefully, can we see repetition? So I'll put these back into place. So let's have a look at these little stomachy things. And I'm going to look at each one of these, and I'm going to look for key marks. And I don't know this because I'm only just checking this, but I'm wondering if there is some form of repetition in this, or if each one of these things is a unique little platelet on its own. So let's have a look around, and let's see. I'm not seeing anything so far. I'll know this for sure as well when I look at the UVs in a bit, but I don't think there are actually any repeated objects. I think all these platelets are all individual, which is very cool. It's not necessarily how I do it. I maybe have 3 or 4 variations. Depends how many it's going around, but I'd have an amount of variation. But it's cool that they've got all that. And then we've got the belt, which is attached to the corset in a very, very cool but topologically technical thing to do. You know, they've done some cool stuff with the topology there, where the belt's actually part of the corset. You can kind of see where the corset blends in, bleeds in to this belt section there. So what they've done is very, very, very cleverly, when they've been retopologizing this, made sure that the belt is actually part of the corset, but without jeopardizing the shape of the corset or the shape of the belt. So that's some very, very, very good technical retopology there. And this company is known for their outstanding, models or outstanding textures. So it's no surprise to me that they can do some absolutely mental thing like that and just be absolutely owning it. As well as that, I've just noticed that little stretch in the corset here, it's been kind of like frayed, is actually geometric. There's a little bit of a thing going on here in these faces. Oh, it makes me happy. Like them faces there that give you that sense of, I mean, that's so subtle. That's so subtle. You absolutely didn't need to do that, but they've done it because they're brilliant. So here you can see that there are some things that just don't need to be overcomplicated. Like, you don't need that button to be part of that pouch, so keep them separate. These little bits, what are them? Oh, they're like little tassels, I guess. Yeah, little tassely bits that come off the edge. Just have them floating on, you know. This isn't going to move, you know, she's never going to interact with this. And even if she does, it's going to be suggested, you know, they'll frame here, and then she'll turn around, look like she's rummaged something, pick it out. You know, you're never actually showing you interacting and turn it out or anything like that. So, you know, for something like that, why don't you just have them placed in? Very, very cool. So another example of how we can cheat the audience a little bit. Again, it's all smoke and mirrors. This is all smoke and mirrors. When we look at the pants here, we can see that there are some studs going down the leg, but they're all textures. None of those are actually physically there. And there's one thing I really want you to pay attention to as well, is even though they're not absolutely bang on, what this is doing, topologically and textures, they're kind of working together. They're following the seams of stuff. So you can see here, you got this seam running down the front right there. The topology is pretty much following that all the way down. Not pinpoint, but pretty much following that all the way down. And then you come down to this point here, and again, it's pretty much following all the way around. The seam that's coming down the side here, you're following that all the way down. So when you make pants, when you make t-shirts, when you make anything that's got a physical seam to it, follow that seam. Even if you're not going to split the UV down that seam, still follow it, because it just helps you. It's just good. It's good to do that. It's good housekeeping, as I say. So the boots are also, by the looks of it, connected, or are they? Can we separate these? There we go. Yeah, so even the boots, again, incredibly clever retopology that they've done here. You know, if you separate the meshes, these are all still connected, so they've incredibly cleverly connected the boots, but they look very separated. They look very different from each other. They look like they're two absolutely different bits of geometry. You don't see an obvious seam. That's because they're hiding all the seams for this, for instance, inside somewhere. You know, they're inside here, and you're never really going to see inside there. You know, if it's in the game engine, there's going to be ambient occlusion, shadow, all that kind of jazz. You're never really going to see in there. Now, the hard part about that is that you've got two quite different shapes running into each other. You've got the legs, which are fairly regular. You know, they're fairly uniform. It's basically just a big cylinder. And then you've got the top of these. Now, this is a really interesting shape because it's like this burlap leather kind of stuff, which is being wrapped around, and then it's been, you know, held on by these straps, and there's bits falling over, and there's a little bit of asymmetricality to it. But yet, they're able to have all this information connected to each other. Incredibly good, incredibly good. Now again, sometimes I might say, yeah, you know what, just just have that leg go into the boot and we'll just cut it off. And that's a perfectly good way of doing it. There are always issues with that though. I mean, I think what they're doing here is they're avoiding geometry clipping through each other. You know, if she's running, and in rigging there's something called weight painting, and if the weight painting is wrong, then maybe a part of the geometry will like come through another piece, or maybe you'll lift up the leg and the leg will travel further than the foot goes, and you'll see like a big void in between. Whatever. Some very, very cool stuff. Very, very cool stuff. And yeah, there's Ciri's not got a load of it. My old Triss Marigold model, which I have no idea where it's gone, had lots of really amazing stuff to look at. And she's very asymmetrical. I think I had her in the special edition outfit and not the standard outfit, which is a little bit more elaborate. It's very asymmetrical. I think. I can't remember too rightly. It's been a while since I played Witcher 3. Brilliant game. But you can see some really interesting stuff going on. And one of my favourite bits is anything to do with how you show flesh and not show flesh. Now this is a perfect example of, if I try and get everything back to how it was, so pull everything back, see if I can do it. Am I going to run into undos? I think I'm going to run into undos. Oh, awesome. So, a lot of what we've been looking at so far, you've had the topology be attached to each other. You know, they've actually built the topologies so everything's connected. They've not done that with the skin, and you should never do that with the skin because that's a completely different box of frogs. And there are, like we saw, there are still elements that are separated, but when I've taken a close look, it's not necessarily that case. But you can see here that the clothing is definitely separate. The density of the flesh is different from the density of the clothing around the shoulders because obviously the clothing has a lot more shape to it. It's got some drapery to it. The skin, not so much. You know, it's quite basic. Interesting thing to look at though is when she's bald, is how they've solved the back of the head issue. So here they've got a lot of nice dense information. You can see areas where are important, like around eyes, around the nose, around the mouth. They've gone the distance to make it a denser. But then areas that you're not going to see, which is being covered up by hair, they've covered up. Oh no, not covered up. Sorry to say, they've brought the density down. And they've done this the same way that I made my Gary head go less in the back of the head. They basically just made triangles in places that you're not going to see information. They've made triangles, so then you basically bring in two faces down to one face across all that kind of length. It's very, very cool. So you can see here, if I was to split the whole mesh up again, like that, we've got some nice separations from stuff. Obviously, this upper piece and this piece are all separate, but when looking at this mesh, that's not always the case, like I said. Both these braces look to be identical, so that could be a mirrored piece of geometry. But especially on this arm, what I was seeing is, again, even though these are separate, I think these might be separate not on my end but on their end, but they've been built with the topology matching up. So it's easy to see here. Again, try and ignore these diagonal edges, but you can see here that you got an edge. In fact, I'll do a bit of a draw over for this one. Where's my mouse? There's my mouse. Whoop. So ignore those diagonal lines. What you've got here is these edges coming down. You know, you can see that they've kept the density of this upper sleeve section down to this bracer, down to the lower sleeve section, all exactly the same. And what the difficulty there, what the really cool puzzle, not a difficulty, a puzzle to deal out with is you go for something that's cloth and it's got weight and it's got influence from this thing wrapping around it. Obviously, this bracer is going to wrap around and kind of choke a lot of this information. And you know, you might think I'll put more information in this sleeve section than I do in the bracer because the bracer is only a cylinder. What they've done is kept it all the same, and just been very, very clever about where they're putting that information and how they're dealing with that information. Because if we just look underneath, here, you've got a point where, rightly so, you've got a lot of information clustering in and being pulled in right here, because obviously this is where the cloth of the elbow. The elbow is always going to be a point where you get more buckling of fabric anyway because of cloth. But then you've also just got, just above the elbow, got this bracer. So right on the inside of the arm there, you've got all this information. And it's really cool how they solved it. Because again, if we draw this information, again, I can see behind the matrix of this, so I know where the topology is. They've created these kind of triangles deliberately. So I'm kind of drawing the actual topology over top of it. So you can see how they've solved this really cool puzzle problem. Pretty much just by using triangles. Like I've always said, triangles aren't necessarily bad. They're just not great. Triangles are great for solving problems. Because they don't deform when you're animating. They don't deform as nicely as quads, even though yes, in game engines we do triangulate stuff. It's a bit of a give and take. But what they've done here is a really nice example of how they can, they've got this bracer arm thing, which let's just say that's 24 edges going around. Before they did any of this fixing, this originally was like say 24 edges going around. But then they've got a sleeve with all this information, which might be in something on the realm of, I don't know, 0.6. So they've got to make up 24 new edges or something, 22 new edges. Now, obviously, you can't just start adding edges in going through it, because that's obviously going to send more edges going into the bracer and across. So you've got to be very careful about altering one object just for the sake of altering another object for the sake of one object. So what they've done here is some really clever stuff. I'm so impressed, and I'm a big fan of CD Projekt Red as it is, although not Cyberpunk. I think Cyberpunk's crap, but definitely the Witcher series I'm a fan of, and Witcher 3 especially. You'll always hear me say that. And they've just done some absolutely fantastic workarounds. So that's very, very cool. But at least in this mesh, when I downloaded it, everything's separate. This is interesting. Now, even down to the gloves are still doing the exact same thing. You can't see it here too much because obviously the arm's going in and being covered up by this section here. This is still exactly the same. This still has edges which meet up on the glove. So if I go inside the arm here, you can see that the arm section here is matching up with the glove section. And it's just amazing attention to detail. Absolutely amazing attention to detail. Because the glove is the same thing. Your glove has got some information, like the belt, and yeah, the buckle is separate because that kind of information is hard to do as one mesh. The buckle, always make buckles separate. But you got stuff like I don't know what you might call it, the cuff. This section here, and then you go into the darker brown section. It's all one mesh, and they've just made sure that they're doing some clever changes. Maybe they'll use triangles, reverse triangles. So instead of going from two edges into one, using a triangle. So I'll draw it out again. So instead of having two edges that then get turned into a triangle to go into one edge like that, what they might have is one edge, but then they're going to make this section here, and obviously going from this width to this width, this amount of edges, let's call this 12. 12 might look okay going around this, but then 12 going around this section, you might look very low poly, because obviously you're stretching that 12 from a small ring to a big ring. So you might want to have something along the realm of 20, something like that. So in this case, what they'll do is they'll take not every edge, but they'll take strategic edges, take it one, and then split it into two like that. So then you take in two edges here and turn them to three. You're adding one or two every time. You're being very, very careful what you're doing. So it's very, very cool. Very, very cool. And again, it's all just about separating stuff. Now, one thing that's probably been what's happened here is somewhere between uploading, distributing to the game engine, played, being downloaded, whatever. It's split up in UV groups essentially. I have a feeling this has been split up in UV groups because these two are obviously part of the same material, but then this is a different material. Well, this is cloth, this is leather. Where this is cloth, this is leather. So even though the edges do actually match up, they've probably been split up for reasons. Now I do know in the case of games like Witcher 3, characters like Geralt, where you can switch off different bits of clothing and stuff, and some of them are wildly different. Some of them are very, very dense and heavy with lots of information, and some of them are very like skin tight and small with not a lot of information. Games like that, you have to be very, very aware of what you're doing. You can't have one piece of armor which is dense and elaborate just for the sake of being dense and elaborate, and the next one being, because it's quite simple, being really low poly. Because then you get too much of a disparity between the visual impact. It's like in 2D, you don't paint one picture on a wall. You paint one texture, and then the next texture is next to it. It's like really kind of crap because then it just won't mix with it. So all these things live in the same world, so they've got to be consistent. Which is very, very cool. So I could talk all day. I could go around this and talk all day about this and all the stuff. I find incredibly cool, and even again very kind of shifty. This and this are all separate. Now I find this horrendously gross. That they've literally just smashed in a bit of geometry here. This is kind of gross. I like it. It's clever. Because I personally would have made this whole thing, this metal section here, as one piece of geometry. And I'm sure there's a reason why. I'm sure there is a reason why. But, like, even though these edges match up, these three things here they're not connected to each other. Because you've got, obviously, this little bit going into the... Actually, let's have a look at the texture. Are these actually physically... Well, I know one bit is going to be... Okay. So I know this bit here is connected to the sheath, so that will naturally be separated. But these two bits look to be in the same, real-world piece. So why these two things are disconnected, I don't know. And it wouldn't have been hard to have this be round and then go into this different shape. We've done that ourselves. We've done that in the first year. It's not hard at all. But again, these two things are definitely separated because they're different materials. I just don't know why these are separate. I don't know why these have been built the way they've been built. It's interesting. It's like a vision through to the artist's mind who built this. Or artists, some characters are built by multiple people. So yeah, some really interesting stuff where the corset connects to the shirt. Again, it's all actually lining up, even though it's not physically connected. It's all lining up. All these edges match up with these ones very, very well. It's very cool. Okay, so yeah, I could spend all day. Well, let's have a look at the textures. Now, the textures are really interesting because obviously this is from a game where people can get different clothing, and they do. Ciri has in the game, in her adult form, she has several bits of clothing that she gets into. Obviously, Geralt, you can swap and change. Yennefer changes all the time, all that kind of jazz. So, one thing I thought was really, really interesting when looking at the textures, I came to the body and I saw this. So I've connected the head and the body together, but this is the texture I'm looking at here. So ignore this, because this is the head. This is all I'm seeing in the texture. It's all that's being shown is what we can actually physically see. I don't actually know where are you? What are you? There's a tiny bit off the shoulder, so that tiny bit off the shoulder. But what we've got here is a nude. So we've actually got a naked Ciri underneath here. And I can't think in the game if Ciri actually ever gets fully nude. I know she'll get stripped down in some points, but it's really interesting that this has actually been created, like a fully nude version. And I'm sure there's one of these for every character. Definitely Geralt. I just thought it was really interesting because I was coming in here expecting a texture that was just what we basically see, shoulders and a little bit of that, like down near the solar plexus. But no, we've got a full body, and it's actually really interesting because you can see that color switching. Because when I first saw this, for some reason, my brain told me that, oh, they've got two versions of arms or something in here because I'm seeing two different colors. But no, what I'm seeing here is just a shift in color going down the body. So here are my arms. There. You can see a little bit of elbow. No, that's the elbow there. That's the elbow. And then these are the feet. So obviously what we've got here is really, really good texturing. But also really, really good attention being paid to different color zones of the body. So we're talking about color zones with the face, but with the body, the color zones here, yes, there are bony landmarks or fat landmarks. But there's also this change between the warmer and the colder areas. I know that I have quite warm hands generally, but I know my sister and my mum have very cold hands. And most of my female friends have cold hands actually. And they tend to be not bluer, but a different kind of color. You know, if you were to see them naked, they would have, you know, near the head, chest, the stomach region, they'd have one tone, and then when you go out to the extremities, they'll have another tone of skin, which is very interesting. So yeah, it was just like, it was a bit of a nice shock to see that, because it makes complete sense for a game like this. If a character is going to be able to switch costume, the last thing you want to do is have different textures for every last little bit. So it makes complete sense that you would have a nude that you would basically just pick and choose what you want from it. Because again, what you'd be doing is working off a base mesh. So they'd have a nude Ciri like that, and they'd dress her, they put the clothes on her, boom, and then they would decide what bits to get rid of, and then they'd start to build the geometry around that. Now, another really cool kind of thing of just occurring to me now is, again, we were talking about a lot of this stuff kind of meeting up. That's got to be consistent for each costume. So every time they redress Ciri, they've got to make sure that the clothing is joining up to the flesh, so they can't necessarily rebuild this flesh section here, because that's the base. You're always building from a nude. So if you texture the nude first, the UVs are done. You can't adjust those UVs because the nude kind of takes priority. But then when you build new clothes on top of that, obviously all the new clothing gets new geometry, gets new UVs. So you'd have to make sure that areas that, if you were doing this, that areas that were connected to the flesh, you'd have to make sure they meet up. That's very cool. Very, very cool. That's like technical game stuff that, I absolutely love it. So yes, I was really impressed to see that. It's also really impressive to see how banged up Ciri was. Like, there's a lot of scratches on here that I just do not remember from the game. You know, from proper manky toes. Also, just as a technical thing, you'll see this a lot in games. You'll see... Can we see the end? There we go. So we got that, which is the shoulder. Oh, back of the shoulder there. There we go. Okay, so what they've done is they've taken a picture. They've taken a UV shot from the front, and they've cut it from the back. So that's cool. So you can see how actually the seam for their bodies in the back there. That's cool. So yeah, you'll see this a lot in games where when you come to the end of textures, when you come to the end of a texture, you'll see this kind of noise on the outside. This is called delineation. It basically allows the texture to end, and then if for whatever reason the texture's being red, like even like 1 or 2 pixels either side of this, you know, if you've got a bright pink background here, what you're going to have is these pink lines where your texture ends, because the way that renderers work, you'll be kind of seeing either side of that. So what they've done here is, it's automated as well. This happens in our softwares. It delineates off all that noise, so that even if you do see, you know, even if it is rendering past the UV point, all you're seeing is kind of like a very close approximation of what should be there anyway, so you shouldn't see any problems. So that's very cool. Let's have a look at the clothing. So here's the clothing. In fact, I'll just, and then I'll, so do that, and then I'll do that, and then there we go. So I've moved the UVs for the clothing off to one side. we go. So you can see what's going on here. Now, again, this is something that I found quite cool, is how chaotic these UVs are. You know me, I like my UVs to be very, very precise. But these actually are surprisingly clean and messy at the same time. They've not necessarily. Some studios will, like this corset for instance, some studios will separate off the belt away from the corset, so they're two separate objects. Even though they might be on the same geometry, they'll split the UVs away from each other because you've got the brown corset and then the darker brown belt. And some studios as well will turn this into a rectangle, like a perfect rectangle, and then allow the inside to do its kind of work. But here they've just allowed it to be itself. They've allowed it to unwrap as they see fit, which is still cool. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing either of those. It's just different approaches. As long as the final result, the visual result, works and it's economical and it's using all the space you can, there are loads of different ways you can do stuff. Also, this really annoys me, to be honest. The legs are in two very different places. Like this is the right leg, the left leg, and that's the right leg. That's interesting. So let's lay this over the top here. So yeah, you can see there, very interesting stuff. Oh, these aren't quite lined up. I don't think. Oh no, they are lined up. I don't know, unless I've moved them by accident. But you can see some fun stuff here. Now also what you're seeing here is colour maps. So these don't necessarily look like they do in the games because obviously in the games they're being affected by a roughness map, normal map, ambient occlusion map possibly. Well, I know there is because it's inside the pack. There's like a roughness, specular, well done, normal, diffuse, specular, ambient occlusion. So they've chosen to do like a bit of an older school. Instead of using like roughness and albedo maps, they've chosen to do a bit of an older school way, which is interesting. Again, this game is getting on a little bit, but the way they did the textures is exactly the same because there's no shadows. It's all just flat colours or absence of shadows and absence of highlights. So here what you've got is just what the colours would be. So there's a lot of wear to the edges of this leather. So it's not making that brighter because it's highlighted. It's making it brighter because that's the point that's been, it's been rubbed a lot more. Same thing here, they've used these lighter sections. That's obviously going to help you read the surface a bit more, but in some tanned and hide leather kind of stuff, they'll tan the surface, and when they cut it, you'll have a brighter inside, a little bit like wood grain. To get that kind of stuff going on. And there is texture things they would have done here that I can see is they've done essentially a high pass filter on this a little bit. I think they've done a high pass filter in Photoshop or something, which just picks up, maybe not in Photoshop, in something. They've done a high pass filter, probably in Substance Painter, where they can actually pick up the heights of something. So using like a curvature map to pick up the very pointy bits of some bits and made them a little bit brighter. And then done the same thing with a curvature map for the very, very inside to make them a touch darker. So that's why you can see some of these highlight sections here just pop out a little bit more. Now you could argue that if you go for hyperrealism, you wouldn't be doing that because clothing generally is a flat color, unless it's printed with a gradation. Clothing is generally flat in color-wise, but obviously here it's realistic a little bit. It's pretty damn realistic, but there are elements to it. So they're just helping that along by just making it a bit brighter. Same for this. You can actually see here where they've got some lighter sections. Now, one thing you could argue very, very rightly so about is that this section here, is it this leg? Where are we at? It's that one. There you go. Yeah, here. I mean, graphically, design-wise, it's always nice to have this bit be a little bit lighter than the inside, but also this is going to get knocked more than the inside. The inside's going to get rubbed together because obviously you got left and right leg doing that. But on the outside of the leg, that's where you're going to get a lot more kind of like wear and tear as well. So you could argue that a little bit of that lighter outside of the leg there, one, helps to pop the character a bit more, but two, makes complete sense. And the same thing down here. you're getting a little bit of that lighter element here, which is very, very nice. So some really, really cool stuff. Oh, here's the things. So looks like we've got 8 of them, 9, 10 of them. Yeah, so all these little buckle things are all separate. But then again, they're putting all these little. Oh, there's 12 of them. Okay, so there's 12 of these little things, I think. Yeah, the UV layout of this is different to how I would do it. There is some very cool stuff as well. I wonder if anyone's noticed yet. If I do that for a few seconds, what one thing is very interesting about that? So I'll give myself like 2 seconds. 1, 2. There's only one glove. So there are 2 gloves in the character, but there's only one glove. Same for the boot. There's only one boot. Which is really, really interesting. There's 2 legs. There's 2 sleeves, I think. Is that the same? Oh no, even that's the same. Cool. Okay, so they're doing some really nice stuff. Blended asymmetry and symmetry. Oh, it's very, very cool. So yeah, so there's some elements of this which are asymmetrical for obvious reasons. Like this has to be asymmetrical because it's asymmetrical. But then, is there only one bracer or is there 2 braces? Oh, cool. There's only one bracer. I knew that one. But yeah, this little section here, that's repeated. That's not repeated. I guess because the shape is different enough. But yeah, what I really like about this is they probably made one boot. Yeah, they probably made one boot and then UV'd it. And then just adjusted the geometry slightly because there is some obvious asymmetricality there. You know, some higher bits, lower bits, droopier bits, whatever. Oh yeah, now I see the symmetry. Yeah, it's this top bit here which is throwing off the symmetry. Very, very cool. Very, very cool. So yeah, there is really fun stuff you can do with the blended asymmetries and symmetries, depending on your costumes. Cool. So let's have a look at a couple of other things. Look at that for that prop. So this prop lives on. Okay, yeah. So this lives on the clothing. The belt is its own thing. So the belt is just, if I move it out of the way, just this. And again, it's unwrapped. Interestingly, you know, it's quite interesting how that's been unwrapped. They're really allowing the geometry to relax how it wants to. They're trying to be as economical as possible. Like these, for instance, what are you? You are the buckle. Okay. You know me, I really don't like these kind of shapes because they take up too much space for what they do. I would absolutely straighten that out, but they've chosen to allow that to do what it does. And I would actually have used a trim sheet for that. I don't know. It's interesting how people approach this. Very interesting. Cool. And that's the face, so I've already done this one. So let me just grab the face and split that off. There we go. Let's grab you and let's separate you. There we go. So this is the face. Now again, what we've got here is a UV's been split up into multiple chunks. That's what they've decided to do. But you can quite clearly see that the main thing, yes, I have split it up into 3 chunks technically. So there are more chances of seeing seams in your face, but not in the places that matter. There's no seams in the face here. It's only on the back of the head in places that you're not necessarily going to see. For instance, like obviously the back of the head's where the main one's going to be. But you can see there that there are no seams at all. Sorry, there's no seams in the head whatsoever. This is quite interesting how they've just got it wrapping round. So you can see there, if we follow the white line, they've done this really interesting thing where they've unwrapped the ear from behind like that, separated the back of the head. Very interesting. And then they split the back of the head. Oh yeah, so they've projected from the front, cut from the back to the top of the hairline, like we're going to be doing, unfolding from there. They've chosen to cut the neck off, which is sensible because that just allows the face to relax a bit more. Some games will keep the neck on, some games will kind of take the neck off. I think I've noticed in a lot of games with like facial customization, they'll separate the head and neck so that you're able to change more on the face. That won't affect the neck, kind of thing. Technical reasons, but some cool stuff. And here again, this is a texture without any highlights or anything like that. They've implied some stuff, like there's a little bit of highlight in the forehead there, a little bit, but generally this is what we've been doing. You know, you can see that chaos, discolorizations, the veins under the skin. You know, exactly what we're doing. Obviously, they've got makeup on here. They've got skin pores, which could have been brought through from a texture. It could have been brought through a normal map from the actual sculpt itself. They've textured the eyelids, not the eyelids, the eyebrows on the actual model, which is interesting. So yeah, some really, really nice, interesting stuff going on with this. Sorry, I've definitely got dust all over my face. Some really, really nice, interesting stuff going on with this character. And then they've got the inside of the mouth as well. So if we go on the inside, they're going to have the mouth bag. Which if we just have a look at that in isolation. There you go. So that's literally what a mouth bag is. It's literally the inside of a mouth. Ooh, that's a bit nasty, that. Ooh. CD Projekt Red, come on. That's literally the inside of the mouth. That's all it really, really needs to be. And then obviously you'll have teethuses. So this is how they're dealing with their teeth. You know, they're keeping everything as one solid shape. Again, triangulation is kind of making this a bit harder to see. But what they've got is they've made their teeth and their gums as one solid mass, so they can texture it like that. In fact, if we get the textures... Oh, I've not got the textures turned on this. Let me apply the textures to this. Let's see how clean the Ciri's teeth are. There we go. Boom. It's very, very cool. So here they've implied a bit of shadow to the actual texture itself. Interesting. So really kind of, again, we're not going for hyper realism here, so they've took some artistic liberties with those UVs. To me, that looks a little bit like scan data, like they've actually scanned someone's gums or something. Possibly. Oh, look at that tongue. That tongue is disgusting, and also really, really stretched. So you can see things don't have to be perfect. When you really get close up to characters, oftentimes they become very fake. You can see where the issues for the character are. So here, it's interesting again. Oh no, sorry, I eat my own words. Just about to say it. I was going to say that that's one of those false edges, you know, around the cheeks. If you don't get the flow right, you sometimes get these little like grooves. But no, that's the actual scar. So what they've done there is made sure they've got some topology in there so they can push it in to have that scar. That's some clever stuff right there. It's very cool. So last things last. Let's have a look at the hair. See how the hair's actually laid out. Seeing as that's what we're looking at yet. So there we go, the hair. So that's her whole hair UV and texture. So remember when we were looking at the hair in the last video, we were looking at, there's a texture of her hair on the head. In fact, we can see it here. There is actually hair on the head, textured in, like a skull cap essentially. So that's dealing with the very, very base of the hair. That's number one, solving no issue. That's getting rid of any issue of seeing through the head into the hair. But here, that's the actual. There's only 4 hair pieces for this, which is very cool. I guess that makes sense because a lot of the hair is already quite long and bundled up. So all you need to do is imply the right kind of information. But here, what you've got is 5, not 4. You've got on the right hand side here, very, very clumpy hair. Very, very clumpy hair. In fact, can I? No, I've only got that one. Very, very clumpy. And then you've got this one, which looks like a bit of a wispy flyaway. So that's definitely going to be like there. like the side of the head, maybe the nape of the neck. Notice how some of the 3 of these have got more of a rectangular form to them, and then 2 of them have got more of a flow to them. So here, the left, middle, and right are all kind of boxy. But the 1, 3, and 5, they're all kind of boxy. 2 and 4, they're kind of flowy. So you can see the purpose of those hairs. Again, I would always have my... I'd always go in order. Go from my densest down to my wispiest. So again, it's just a really nice insight to see what they're doing. So you can see here, another cool thing is with this hair that it just ends right here. There's no bleeding. So this to me, because I'm reading this as the very top section here being the root, so this is where it originates from the head. I have a feeling that this is the stuff if I grab that skull cap, move that out the way. Is that bit where are you? Yeah, okay. So, oh no, it's that. Yeah. Oh, this is all very weird. Oh, this one's doing it as well. Okay, so this like 1, 3, and 5 are all ending right at the edge of the UV. So that's telling me that they're coverage pieces. They're pieces that are meant to go all the way around, and not necessarily. You don't necessarily see the end of it. So they'll be the ones that are going into the back of the bob back here, because they just go and end. You know, you don't need to see the end of them. Whereas the other 2, you're going to see the end of those. They're the bits that fly away, the bits that come off the head. So obviously you need to see the end of those. So it's very, very interesting, very, very clever. That's a good little bit of an insight. So yeah, definitely at the top here we've got the roots coming out the head. I can kind of tell that as well, because these don't go to a nice fine point gradually. These kind of end. And hair that comes from the top of the head tends to just start, in like a texture standpoint. It tends to just start. You don't have nice beginning in a very soft gradient. It's like a very quick start. So it stops you from having a very wispy hair at the top, unless that's what you need. So interesting. And you can see here the layout of this is interesting, because this is what it looked like when it first come in. So yeah, all those. What are all these? That's just a skull cap section. Yeah, that's all that coverage we were talking about. And then what are you? What are you? You're, oh yeah, you're all the back of the ponytail. So again, you don't need to see the ends of these meet or end or anything like that. And quite interesting enough as well, some of these are getting stretched quite a lot. You can see that they're not the neatest. They're either being stretched or they're being condensed. They're not the neatest of layouts. But again, what do you when you see the whole thing together, it makes visually makes complete sense. And then what are you? You're all okay. So that's in the bun again. Those are kind of like more volumetric pieces of the hair, which is great. What are you? Again, the bun. So again, these are just bits. Oh, that's interesting. So what they're doing here as well is they're using, so that's part of this kind of section here, they're using just a clump, so they're not even getting the tips, the roots, they're just using a section which just starts and then just ends, just to have the middle section. So they'll have that come from the inside, wrap round, then go to the outside, so from the back of the head round and then into itself, because all you need is that center mass of hair to get, you know, the flow of the hair in there. And what are you two? You two are, again, they're doing the exact same thing. Notice how these aren't, if these are at the top of the UV square here, they'd be using the roots, but these are further down, so they're just literally using that section. So these start. So where are you? Okay. Oh, okay. So that's coming from behind the ear. Is something attached to something? Have we got a bit of a bad geometry here? Ooh, something's happening there. Okay. So yeah, here what we've got is very interesting, very, very interesting layouts here. It really is a massive eye-opener. And here we've got some flyaways. So these are using the really wispy stuff. These nice wispy stuff here to get the nice flyaways from around the hair. But you can see how they all start in this one area. Down to about here. So not all the way to the back of the head. They go to about top of the cranium there, and then they start going to the back of the head. And it's just all about applying volume. But remember, going from your skull cap, there's no volume there. You're just covering the surface. And then your first coverage layer, there's not really meant to be tons of volume there. And then you get more volume as you go, and more volume as you go. So you get more volume as you go to the more complex, smaller, strandy bits. That's really interesting. So analysing that mesh was really, really interesting. There's a lot of stuff that we can look at there. And again, a lot of what we're going to be doing with characters, it's all smoke and mirrors. In games in general, it's all smoke and mirrors. You're just implying stuff. The audience doesn't need to know exactly how something looks. Because look at that. That looks like a chaotic bundle of hair. But they don't know that there's actually some really janky UV stuff going on because they don't care, do they? They just want to play. So very, very cool. So that's just like a bit of analysis of Ciri, and you know, most characters are going to look something similar to this. The more stylized you get, the more you'll have other workarounds. The more realistic you get, the more you'll have probably separations of stuff. You'll probably have less things lining up and connecting to each other. The more realistic you get, and the more stylized you get, the more things actually do line up and connect. I assume that's the way I do it. And of course, I never do anything wrong, so whatever. But yeah, really, really interesting. Obviously, I can't distribute this model. I can't say where I've got it. I've got hold of it. I've had it for a while. But if you are to ever get hold of like legit game characters from games, just have a look at them. Just have a look at them. Or if you know any websites which allow you to look at stuff, I know that there's Wowhead for World of Warcraft characters. You can, in the Destiny item manager, you can actually inspect characters and inspect weapons and stuff. You can't break that. You obviously can't look at the wireframes. You can't download them, but you can at least look at them a bit closer. And what's fun about the Destiny item manager one, in fact, I might pause the video and get mine up here, is they look completely different to what's in games. So give us a sec. Okay, so I had a look, and it wasn't what I thought it was. It wasn't the app that I thought it was. But there is an app out there where you can look at Destiny 2 items. But what it does, what I was talking about, is obviously because Destiny relies on a lot of shaders, and you'll see this with any game where you can kind of reskin something, is that it relies on a lot of like PBR shaders and really cool stuff. I remember bringing something which I thought had like a very bright, shiny kind of texture to it. I thought the texture itself would be bright and shiny, knowing that it's going to change because obviously you're going from in-game to an app. I thought, oh yeah, it's going to change. But it was a silvery kind of metallic surface. I was expecting it to be quite silvery metallic. What I actually got was like incredibly dark, with not even like the same remote color that I thought it was going to do. And it's interesting how shaders work in games, and different games use shaders in different ways. It's very, very interesting. But here's a nice little overview. Now I've tried doing this in the past this year, and I can't seem to find any of my old characters. I don't know what's wrong. They've all kind of disappeared on me. And it's very hard to get hold of new game characters, legitimately. So, but that was a good one to look at too. You can see how the clothing's done. You can see how the hair's done. You can see how the body's got a really nice little technical story to it. Obviously, how the face has been done. Let's have a look at the eye. Actually, just a quick one. Let's have a look at the eye. See how they've done the eye. Cool. So, boom. Eyes are going to be really easy to do. Quite fun to do. And there's eyelashes, which is this. So, eyelashes, that seems to be a bit of a... feels like a bit of a waste to me. I would have kept the eyelashes on the head or the hair texture or something, or even the head texture. But one texture just for the eyelashes. Look at how simple it is as well. Interesting. Very, very interesting. So yeah, that was like a little breakdown of Ciri. No, nothing too difficult, just an hour looking at a cool character. Well done.